How do you build a medical device without your engineering team quietly accumulating technical debt, scale issues, and the dumb little mistakes that always show up at the worst possible time? Because if you crack this, you don't just ship faster, your margins hold, your team doesn't burn out, and the silent little disasters that kill most growth stage medtech companies either don't happen or are small and manageable. But how do you actually do it? Well, I brought on Ryan Schoonmaker, 20 plus years in the arena. Ryan was on the team that brought the Dexcom G6 and G7 continuous glucose monitors to market. He led mechanical engineering at Beta Bionics, and now he runs Tightline Solutions, where he works with growth stage medtech companies and turns chaos into predictable processes and good engineering leadership practice. Ryan breaks down his entire playbook, his new, unique, and different framework for de-risking the subsystems that always blow up at scale, how technical debt actually shows up in physical hardware, not just software, the two roadmaps every medtech company should be running in parallel, and the Stairstep regulatory play founders are using to speed up development. This is the kind of inside knowledge that you really don't want to miss. People who stick around at the end of the episode are going to walk away with an unfair advantage, the stuff that most growth stage medtech teams are too deep in the weeds to see. I had a blast with this one, and I know you're going to as well. Let's get into it. Ryan, thank you for joining the pod today. Where do we find you today?
Hey, Spencer. Great to be here. I'm in Eagle, Idaho. So it's just outside of Boise.
Just outside of Boise. So where in the shape of Idaho, I know it's the long, skinny top part and then the rest of it, like where physically is it within Idaho?
Yeah, so Boise is in the southwest corner of the state. So right down the very bottom, and Eagle's just the northwest of that. So,
Gotcha.
So it's like getting to the point of the Oregon border. The family and I just took a trip to Oregon over the weekend, 45 minutes to an hour to the Oregon border.
Yeah, I've got a buddy that lives up there. We went to like Haystack Rock and did some really awesome hiking, kind of Mount Hood, some hiking around there, which was awesome. The trail itself was great, and it was like challenging. I think it was a ton of elevation change, but it was like a 7.5 mile hike. But it was great. The scenery was incredible.
It's pretty awesome out there. We were over in Bend, Oregon. Just yesterday, we were in a place called Smith Rock. So it's Smith Rock State Park, and tons of climbers. I don't know if you're into rock climbing, you've ever done it, ever tried it?
I'm not.
I'm not into it, but I was shocked as to how many climbers. I mean, we were just there to take a little walk and check out the river and stuff like that. But my gosh, there was probably hundreds of climbers there. It's pretty awesome.
Dude, that's one of those things that like you try to do it and then like you realize like your forearms are just not built like those people that do it a lot. And you're just like barely drive home in your car because your just hands are like so tight. But anyways, enough about all of that. We'll get into it. Ryan Schoonmaker, founder and CEO of Tightline Solutions. Ryan, you've spent probably 20 years at this point doing medtech engineering, lots of mechanical engineering. Dexcom brought the G6, G7 to market, Beta Bionics, some other huge engineering roles at those places. And now you run Tightline, partners with growth stage companies, doing product development, honestly, engineering leadership stuff, which I think is really cool. And we'll unpack that, like getting through those chaotic engineering issues or unpredictable oh shit moments, for lack of a better word. And how do you get through that from like a product standpoint, but also through like a team and leadership standpoint, where I think is interesting. So we're going to talk about technical debt in med tech. Tech debt's a word that, you know, in the AI space, you hear a lot, why so many growth stage companies hit walls, all that stuff. But maybe just to start, we can jump into it and say, I'm curious, Tightline Solutions, how you came up with the name and what does it mean to you?
Yeah, so it was a joining of my personal interest in fishing, because I'm a big fly fisherman, and something that I think is important in product development, and that's keeping the right amount of tension in your program. So whenever you catch fish, you want to keep the line tight. And too much tension, it's going to break. Too little tension, you're going to lose the fish. So it's similar in product development, where you want to have a certain amount of tension in the team. Too much is going to be bad. Too little is also not a good thing. You want that right amount. That's where the name came from.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, whenever you initially said there, like right amount of tension in the team, my head kind of immediately went to that like nascent level of expectation that like each team has. And it's like a lot of the times it was never like quantified or never even spoken potentially, but it's just like through the way people operate in the leadership, whether it's at the project or the company level, like what is the kind of baseline level of expectations for work quality and work ethic and output and investigation before you like bring problems to other people that you could have Googled kind of stuff. That stuff's super important. I'm always about like how people got to where they are today, and then like the formative things that shaped them or turned them into who they are. I know Dexcom was a big part of your career, but if you could just talk through maybe with some of those reference points from a career standpoint of like, what were the organizations and projects where you feel like you really cut your teeth and it shaped you and gave you the perspective that you have and you use at Tightline today?
Yeah, I'd start with where I began. So I began at a consulting company called Helbling Precision Engineering. And that company was, I'd say, very impactful for me in career, really shaped me as an engineer from a few different perspectives. First perspective being they had a very methodical, structured approach to engineering, which I then took on a part of the way that I did things. So that was one. And then the second was just being able to tell the story. I was in front of clients at least on a weekly basis, if not more. And so I really learned how to communicate the engineering and technical story and bring them along with me. How did I get to that conclusion? How did I get to that point? And so I learned that when I was there.
Yeah. When you're at Dexcom, like something I'm always interested about, because like a lot of the Medtech products, I think call it Medtech Classic or Med Device Classic, are plastics and metals and some this and that, right? But that kind of connected wearable element where there's a software, PCB, power on board, all of that stuff. Like I feel like that's kind of its own unique, almost like subset of medtech wearables, the different varieties. But it also comes with obviously like a unique set of kind of design and engineering and project management challenges. I talked to Jeremy Ridley at one point at Delve, which they're like kind of design, pretty big design and development group, pretty salty group. But he described an interesting, you've got your design review meeting 1, design review meeting 2, like kind of the traditional device flow. But he said on the software team, they would have these arcs, and he described this kind of unique way that the arcs and the design reviews coincide, overlap, but don't hold each other back kind of thing. But I'm just curious if you could speak through when you were at Dexcom, how you think about that when you've got connected or software embedded elements, pairing that with that hardcore mechanical design of components and housings and how things fit together, fluid flows and motors, and how you see what's your kind of successful strategy in your mind to having both of those sides of the house play well with each other when you have connected devices.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge, I'd say, but these days, everything is integrated. It's tough to find a product out there, I think, or a development program where you don't have an app to integrate or you don't have software or firmware to integrate. It's a definite challenge. We saw it at Dexcom. I think part of the key is the integration points, identifying those really key critical integration points in the program and making sure the different teams and functions are just driving to and tracking to those integration points creates the necessity for excellent communication, breaking down silos and making sure teams are talking, the hardware team talking to the firmware team and the software team, the human factors team. And so they all need to be integrated together.
Yeah, I got to imagine too, there's probably, maybe it's like pre-design review meeting 1 where it's, hey, like what battery size do you need to power this thing? But that's really largely driven by what's the size of the PCB that you're going to need. Because all of those things, those are like digital constraints that have a physical embodiment that then the rest of the mechanical design has to bend and flex around. You know what I'm saying? So I got to imagine like that front end stuff where it's like, if they try to change that after like design review meeting 2, it's like, guys, like huge headache.
Yeah, I think all that starts with having good design input process, right? So if you have a good design input process and all the teams are on the same page there, then it makes some of those conversations and discussions and really visibility to where those key integration points are. And then you can have those discussions and conversations early and up front. And sometimes there might be key questions to answer, right? Especially early in a program. Some of the things that you were just bringing up, the team may not know 100% what the size of that battery needs to be. And that might be what I like to call the killer questions, which could change your system architecture from one to another, depending on what the needs are. But surfacing and getting that stuff to float to the surface up front and then prioritizing your work accordingly, I think is key to a successful integrated project and program.
I agree. I want to get your take on this because it's something that I've like developed my own thesis on, and I've asked some other people about it too. But the core question is like, say you're like a 1 or 2 product company, or maybe even a handful, but you're not Medtronic, you're not a huge, massive company, right? With all these different resources and divisions, product lines. So When you're in that kind of small or kind of emerging stage, when do you start to innovate on the next iteration of the product? Because what I've seen is like, hey, we've got this product, we design it, okay, we take it through V&V testing, whatever, we submit to the FDA, and it's like, okay, like resting on the laurels happens, you just start coasting, you're not really doing any product development work, whatever. And I would bet you that like most teams, like when they submit that device to the FDA, let's say it's after testing, maybe even some clinical evaluations, whatever, they kind of already know what they'd like to change about it. My approach is basically when you submit that to the FDA, or maybe when you get clearance, you should already be designing the next iteration and like continue to work on it. Because like if you think, well, in 2 or 3 years we'd like to come out with a better version of this, you start now. So what's your theory of the case on when you should start developing the next generation, even if you're just getting your first generation on the market? When should you be working on that second generation, and like what's the cadence in your mind of like when you should plan on rolling it out and moving it through those later stages? Feel free to completely disagree with my take.
I agree with that. You need to have a roadmap. It's okay if the roadmap changes and pivots, but I think any company absolutely needs to have a roadmap, and you might have maybe 2 roadmaps. One is an iterative roadmap on the thing you're launching or the thing you have just launched, because there's always things that you want to change or want to do better in the next iteration. And a lot of times there's good reason to make those changes. So there's kind of that roadmap. In addition to that, I think there should also be a new technology roadmap that then gets rolled into, let's say, 5 years down the road instead of 1 to 2 years down the road. Some of the things that you may want to do take some serious technology development, and the technology is not mature enough yet to really roll into a product. And I think that's a misstep that I think a lot of companies make, is they try to put new technology into products too early before they're ready and mature. So I think you need 2 roadmaps. One is the iterative one, smaller, better user features, better usability, etc. And the other is, hey, what's that next level technology transformation that takes us to the next phase?
Yeah, I agree. It seems like in startup world, early stage world, like companies just don't want to budget for it. They think that their V1 is going to take them to the promised land, and it just so rarely ever does. It's like your Gen 2, Gen 3 ends up getting acquired. And I also think too, like there's this notion that you're going to be able to automate your way into better cost of goods. And it's like, yeah, you might be able to, but like, in all reality, it's going to take such a huge capital expenditure and a decent amount of time to get a full-scale automated assembly cell together. And it's like, let's just say it was going to cost $750K and a full year to like really implement, right? So you're kind of cannibalizing your old investments in your product and assembly and whatever, right? For the most part, you can reuse some vibratory bowl feeders, some stuff like that. But I feel like people think, well, we'll just automate it to get the cost of goods down. When in all reality, it might be the same cost and really not as much time to innovate around the product, make that Gen 2 better, have other clinical advantages or performance advantages. And then you may reduce the number of components, reduce the number of welds, reduce the XYZ, right? And on net, like you're going to have a bigger reduction that you can then even further reduce with automation if you choose to. I've just seen that like, we'll get the cost of goods down later, be this like lazy answer for cost of goods that are too high. And if things aren't going perfect, which they rarely do, then you're like, oh, well, we don't have the money now to do the automation, but we still got high cost of goods. And now we're kind of behind the 8 ball. And we don't have a development project that's like in motion in an aggressive way for like a better, cheaper Gen 2. Anyways, I've just seen that hang companies up. And I don't know, is there any comment that you have on like how early stage companies with their Gen 1 or post commercialization, maybe Gen 1 or Gen 2, like any broad thoughts on cost of goods reductions, like how much and when they should be thinking about it?
Yeah, everything you bring up is a challenge. And I think every company at certain stages runs into those exact questions. And a lot of times it's resources. You only have limited resources to invest in next generation new technology. So tough decisions need to be made a lot to be able to right size your development effort with the strategy of the company and where it wants to go and what its goals are and what its mission is.
Yeah.
In terms of thinking of cost reduction and all those things and the right time, you want to get it as close to right upfront as you can. I think it is important. But as we all know, sometimes you just got to get something out
Yeah.
onto the market to learn from it to be able to then get to that next level of margin and so on. I'd say it's pretty common to work on iterating and improving cost after you launch something. But
Yeah.
I'd say that you want to get as close to right up front and at least have a plan and a vision and a roadmap to get to where you want to end at the end of the day.
Yeah, I agree. In a perfect world, in my mind, I think it's like your initial device that you get to market, you got to get there fast. You got to start generating revenue. You're going to learn a ton from getting it in users' hands. And then like you should have an active development plan. Like you said, that there's like an innovative technology path, maybe longer, but then your other roadmap for product that's just Gen 2 optimization clinically, and then cost of goods. What did we learn from the users? What did we need to change? Because it's like that Uber model where it's like, remember, Ubers used to be cheap because they were just trying to get people to like use it. And to some respect, like you do what you need to do on price to get users, and your margin may suck. You may be basically like break even on the devices that you're selling for that first year. But like in all reality, the difference between a 10% margin and a 25% margin in your first year or first 18 months of sales is not going to move the needle for your business. That's not going to cash flow you in most cases with devices, just because of the sales cycle and how long things take. So that's my theory of the case there, is like Gen 1 is supposed to be work really well and get to market fast and allow you to learn from your users. And then that Gen 2 should be like 2 years after that, frankly. And then that's where you start to really optimize and like gain efficiencies in margin, gain a little bit better clinical impact, right?
Yeah, I think the key is to not system architecture yourself out of cost reductions, if that makes sense. So I think there's instances where, and I've been in these situations where in order to get to that next major stepwise cost reduction level, it required a complete change in system architecture.
Yeah.
A lot of time. It takes a lot of investment. You can definitely get there, but I think an optimal strategy is to really pay attention up front to your system architecture of your initial product and make sure there's a nice iteration path where you can pull cost out and it doesn't require a complete overhaul of your system architecture design to get there.
Yeah, I agree. And I think too, like, this is my kind of word to the wise, and then we'll move on. I think this is like an important piece of the puzzle in my mind. Things often do not go as planned in early stage and emerging companies and whatnot. One of the first things to get cut is sales and marketing, but depending on the organization you're at, like one of the other things that's going to get cut is any R&D activities that are ongoing, right? So I feel like that to the people out there, founders working the board, whatever, like you have to budget for it. You have to make it a part of the budget. And if you believe that your board may have a proclivity to do this, then like over budget for it. And then any budget cut you do will still be viable for the team to actually go forward and execute with, because what you don't want is cutting off your nose to spite your face. Sales aren't going well. You kill the R&D. Sales and marketing takes a haircut. R&D gets completely trimmed to like skeleton mode or nothing. And then you find yourself another 18 months down the road and like you have no answer other than, well, let's spend $750,000 that we don't have on fully automated assembly cell and just trying to put a lipstick on a pig with something you guys all know can be better and should be better and all that jazz. But I do have a question. And if you've not seen this or experienced it or whatever, we just toss it, move on to the next question, because I've got some questions about pitfalls and why you started Tightline and stuff like that. But I've seen some companies, and frankly, the ones that I saw do this were pretty advanced and like founders that had done this before, deeper capital pockets backing the ventures, but they used kind of this Stairstep regulatory approach where they got something cleared that I don't even know that they commercialized, and then used themselves as their predicate, whether it was like letter to file, special 510Ks or otherwise, where like they ended up commercializing that second or third thing that they got cleared. They really just used this kind of Stairstep approach to like get the ball rolling and then move forward. Have you seen that used? Did you guys use that strategy at any companies that you've been at?
I have absolutely seen that strategy used. Actually, I think over the last 5 years, I think it's, at least from my experience, becoming more and more common.
Yeah.
And even if it wasn't actually used, it was definitely discussed and it was definitely debated amongst internally within the company. Some companies were willing to do it. Others were a little bit more conservative and did not end up taking that approach.
Unpack that a little bit. Like I kind of have my own reasons, but like for people in the audience, I was like, why would you do this? Why would you get something clear that you're not really going to use? What's the value in using yourself as the predicate? Like walk through that.
Yeah, it's exactly what we just talked about in terms of having that iterative plan. Once you file something with the FDA, that starts the clock of their review. So in essence, what you're doing is while they're reviewing that initial submission, you're already working on what you really want to release, what you really want to get out into the market. It stacks things from a schedule standpoint. It makes things run a little bit more parallel and stacks things together, or at least from an R&D mindset and an R&D strategy. That's the thinking on it.
Yeah. And I think if the difference between like what you initially get cleared and then the next iteration of what you get cleared, if the difference is minimal enough where you can say, we're going to basically use a justification for biocomp and packaging and transit and chip testing and, cytotox and sterilization validation, if you can reuse all of that, which there's time and 4 to 5 months, if you will, whatever, and it's maybe just an expansion of indications or a slight tweak that allows you to have some additional XYZ, I think that's where it's probably has the most utility.
To make it work, there's certain things that would not be able to change, right?
Yeah.
You're not changing materials. That's not a strategy. There's definitely things that need to be locked and you're not changing, but it gives you the flexibility to make a change that makes it more manufacturable. Maybe there's a scalability risk in one of your processes or in your design that then affects the process. In those 6 months, you can be fixing that. You can be iterating and tweaking, let's say, the design of a component that makes it then more scalable, improves that process, and a lot more commercially viable. So that there's only certain things that you can really tweak and iterate.
Yeah. And my final comment on this is just like, I think one way I've thought about it too is like, you may have something that's really unique, maybe so unique that they try to push you de novo, right? Mm-hmm. Because of what it can do and these other features, whatever. So like the full element of what you have could be a de novo, would likely get pushed that way. But if you take out this part, it's really a very similar predicate device to this other thing, right? So you take that part out, that feature, that indication, whatever, that claim, you get that cleared. Oh, that's 510K. Great. Now we can add this part and then claim that our own devices are predicate. And now it would strain credulity to say that like this thing with that full element is not a predicate to our other thing that's like 98% the same. So I think some companies will use it as a defensive mechanism to not get pushed de novo and still be able to later add that additional feature. And I've seen people use it too, where they can say, well, we want to add this feature, but we think they're going to ask for clinical evidence for it. So let's get this cleared without that claim, without this, get it cleared, run this pilot that we already have or clinical study that we already had teed up. That takes 6 months. We report the results. Boom, letter to file, expanded indications, mostly the same device. So I think there's both an element to that as well. But talk me through, you were at some of the kind of largest, most successful companies, BD, Dexcom, and in their given and individual spaces. So like, what was it that made you, want to kind of walk away, march to the beat of your own drum, help early and emerging and growth stage companies with engineering product development leadership?
Yeah, I'd say impact more broadly was what drove me the most. I've seen product development teams trip up or get trapped into the same stuff over and over and over, which it's painful to be in those situations. And sometimes it's painful to see the product development teams go through those same things over and over. So that was a big impetus for me to start Tightline, 20 plus years in the industry. And I've seen patterns over the years. And it's part of our mission to propel products and propel careers. There's nothing more that I want to see than for people to experience the benefits of the products getting developed. 1, seeing product development teams succeed. 2, and 3, have product development teams be excited to come to work every day and not burnt out and afraid of failure. You see stuff like that all the time. I want to change that. Because I think it's common. Across, in the industry.
I think it's very common. I'm totally with you. When you get those wins, and most people are not going to have 100 in their career, right? It's like, maybe a dozen for some people, right? It depends on, types of company and how many products you worked on or whatever. But like those team wins, like product development team wins, when you get that thing. Yes, the FDA clearance point's a big deal, but for a lot of devices, did we perform well in the clinical studies? Did our first year, no kappas or very few kappas, did it work well? Are we getting good feedback from the users? Like those are the things that are kind of like really satisfying proofs in the pudding, right? Because like you can get a device cleared, but that doesn't mean it's good or it's going to be like a commercial success. You know what I mean? So I found too, there's that big like, all right, let's pop a little champagne for the FDA clearance. But then when you start to get those kind of trickling in data points, clinical study results, and patient or customer testimonials, like those are the things that are like awesome to see and experience when you're on a product development team. So like looking at growth stage companies, which I know is something that you're specializing in at Tightline, what are some of the most common pitfalls, or what are the most common patterns that you'll walk into where you can see something's broken or the pitfall is obvious to you?
Yeah, there's so many. But if I narrowed it down to just a few, or maybe some of the biggest ones, I'd say, especially for growth stage companies, and I lived that through Dexcom. Like when I first started at Dexcom, they were just starting to get traction in the market and really take off and grow. So I lived it. But I'd say, number one, adequately preparing for commercial scale issues. I don't think that companies have the foresight all the time, especially at that stage. They've, just gotten a product out there. They've maybe been struggling to even get to that point to have things in place where they've mitigated scale risks. I'd say it's not very common. So that's a common pitfall, is just adequately preparing for those commercial scale issues. And they always come.
I want to come back to you if you have another one or two common pitfalls or patterns, but not adequately preparing for commercial stage or scaling growth and issues. Like drill in a little bit more. Give me like a case study of something like as specific as you can, where it's like, this is going to happen or this is likely going to happen, and teams are not usually prepared for it.
Yeah, I mean, injection molding is very common in the med device industry, especially for high volume products. Say going from a low volume tool to a higher volume tool, and the variability that comes with that. And I'm not even just talking about dimensional variability. I mean, there's surface finish variability. There's so much variability that comes from that. If you don't know where your key technical risk areas are and where you're sensitive and where the cliffs are and where things start failing, be prepared for a commercial scale challenge and issue. And usually it's at the worst possible time. And I've seen that so many times. And then just things like changing a supplier. You have a supplier, now you're going to bring on a second supplier, and they might have processes 95% the same, and there's 5% of it that they do a little bit different. And again, if you don't know where your sensitivities are in your design, and so on, it's a vulnerability for an issue. And you need to be prepared for that by knowing those things up front and doing the appropriate risk mitigation activities up front to either mitigate it or just be ready for it.
Yeah. I'm almost thinking too, you go from a low cavitation tool to a higher cavitation tool, and part of your thing has an area that has to be glued to a piece of tubing or to be bonded to something, right? And a slight difference in dimension paired with a slight difference in the surface texture or finish, right, coming off the tool may result in, not a 0.1% failure to glue or bond or hold, but like a 2.5% or 4% failure to glue or bond or hold, right? And that's something that like, okay, what's our risk there? How much do we need to control this? I'm curious, like in that case, are you doing things at the individual tool level to make adjustments or modifications? Or is this more largely on the molding process, cooling, injection pressure, and really tweaking those in? Or is it something else more downstream? Once the parts are off, there's a additional secondary operation that you have to do to like kind of standardize those parts as they're coming off?
Yeah, I mean, I would do it more upfront, or I would try to do it more upfront. And the way that I would do that is very early in a program, identify what's new, what's unique, and what's difficult. And one of the things you mentioned, joining joints and gluing and things like that, those are always difficult. They're not new, they're not unique, but they're always difficult. So that's something that you invest in early in the program. If you already know you're going to have a joint or something you need to glue or weld or whatever it is, then you take that subsystem outside of your development program and you understand all the sensitivities up front. Then you take that, and any new supplier, they know that it needs to meet XYZ from a surface finish standpoint, from a dimensional standpoint, etc. And that's going to put them in a much better position to succeed as a supplier. And it's going to put your company in a better position to scale.
That's interesting.
Everything up front and make sure you identify what's new, unique, and difficult in your.
That new, unique, and difficult. I really like that. That's like a great rule of thumb. Just another kind of thought here too is you're growing, you're scaling, et cetera. And this is just a specific project, but you may have some VHB double-sided tape that's on a screen, right? And you're like, oh, these things have like at least a 2-year shelf life until you need to apply them or whatever. And you get this supplier and like thinking through, okay, well, if we're buying this in this much bulk, we're buying it from a larger supplier, right? They're sourcing it, whatever. Like when that screen or sheet was basically produced, and then that's time zero. That's day zero. Mm-hmm. And then when was it cut? How long was it stored? When was it cut for you? And then when was it delivered? And then how long did that sit on the shelf? Because you may be humming along a year later and realize, hey, we're having a huge issue with these screens and the bonding because the 10,000 yard roll was purchased by this huge new supplier you got 7, 8, 9 months before it even got cut for you. It took 2 months to deliver. And then all of a sudden, like you're a year in and you're trying to apply these screens that are basically expiring or in the process of expiring. And then not knowing the nuance around like, well, it's a 2-year expiration, but that last quarter or two is like really iffy and you may get 30% failure. So I think those are all growing pains that like, it just takes people that have been doing this for a while, frankly, to really start to like sniff out and get ahead of versus just dealing with them well when they happen, which is also another skill.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Any other patterns or common pitfalls?
Yeah, I think one of them we mentioned, and that's teams not knowing where their failure cliffs are. Once you identified the new, unique, and difficult, like we already talked about, you go deep on those to know not just am I passing at nominal normal conditions, but how do I understand critical parameters and then know when failures start happening and how much margin do I have? Am I sitting on an edge and I've gotten lucky, or do I have 5x margin on this specific thing and I'm in good shape? And I'd say another pitfall is actually on the usability side. I think people often will, especially earlier stage companies, they will use internal resources to do formative studies. It's convenient, it's cheap, but those studies, I think, can steer you in the wrong direction because people are more familiar with the product. They're more familiar how to use it. They're more familiar. So you don't always tease out all the wild ways people are going to use your product. And in my experience has been people will use your product in ways that you wouldn't even think or imagine that they would. I think early on, putting your product into people's hands with zero instructions and just observing how they interact with it and use it and how they want to naturally use it is something that should be done. Not to be successful and pass, you want to fail at that point. You want people to misuse it and you want to learn how they're going to misuse it. And then you can design that into the fixes to the next iterations.
Yeah, that's great. We kind of dealt with this with a project I was working on where, it was a case and there was 4 clips, right? And then we put these almost overlapping, but not overlapping elements so you could press on both ways to open the case or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And so we put those on each side and it was to us obvious that's how you opened it. But we started having people that said, oh, these clips are breaking. We're like, what? The clips are breaking? What we realized is these people were just prying it, like grabbing part of it and then pressing on this clip, right? That was just connected with a pin, a dowel pin. And that's how they were trying to open it. And it was one of those things of like, we're so close to it. It's like, yeah, you'd never open it like that. These are secured with the dowel pin and it's plastic. People don't think like that, especially if you have a consumer, like broad general consumer use product. Like people don't think mechanically like that a lot of times. And they're just like, oh, this is a big thing I can grab onto to do this thing. I'm going to yank on it. And they're not thinking about material strength or a dowel pin. They're just thinking, I want to get this thing open. Let me grab on this. That was something I think we could have headed off with maybe some like reinforcements at full open position. And then education, which we ended up having to do. But like just an example of like, would have never thought someone would have yanked on it that way, but they do.
To be honest, as an engineer, early in my career, these things frustrated me a lot. And looking at how people would interact with your device, you didn't want to deal with it, but you're like, I can't believe they're using it that way. Can't we just train them? Can't we just teach them to use it the way it's intended, the way that we designed it and so on? And it was a frustration, but I've learned over the years, that's the wrong mindset and that is the wrong approach. And it's not going to lead you to success. It's better to embrace, hey, people are going to use these things in a wild way. Let's learn up front how they're going to be most inclined. Yeah. And then take that information and data up front to design it differently that makes the experience for them the best it can be. And it makes you more satisfied as a designer and an engineer. Yeah. Hey, I went about this the right way and customers happy and I'm happy. because it's a success.
Yeah.
Working.
It's like that UFMEA piece, right? The user FMEA.
Yeah.
Like you almost need one that's like a DU FMEA, like a dumb user FMEA, where you put like okay, this would never happen, but what if type stuff, right? Into that bucket and then see what you need to fix on that. Something I wanted to ask about was that you brought up when we were kind of planning for this, but like technical debt, right? Which is tech debt. You hear it a ton with AI and vibe coding and where large language models are writing the majority of the code and you've got all this tech debt and you don't actually know who understands the code. Well, no one really understands it. They kind of do, whatever. But anyways, so very well-worn concept in software. But what's your approach or perspective on technical debt in a product development process, and how does it actually show up in physical medtech products in your mind?
This is something that I'd say, again, over the last few years has started to come into more and more conversations that I've been in. I think it's a very valid and real concept in hardware as well, from a standpoint of the mentality that we need to get a product out, right? And it doesn't always need to be perfect.
Of course.
If you're going for perfect, a lot of times you're not going to get there. In terms of speed of working through the process of development, especially for companies that are maybe a little bit more resource constrained, I think it's natural to take on some technical debt to be able to hit your milestones and to get there. I think the key, though, is to know how much debt you're taking on. Like in the financial world, you take on too much, it's irresponsible. You're never going to get there. And any debt you take on, there is an interest rate associated with it. So you do end up paying more from a development standpoint to make up for the debt that you took on. So,
drill in a little bit. It's like a granular example of physical product tech debt that we can like pick at and pull apart.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it goes back to some of the previous stuff that we've already talked about. As an example, let's say you have a feature on your product where two components need to come together and maybe they snap together and the user needs to do that step. They push this thing together and snap it together, right? And you know that for 100% of your population that's going to use this product, your force needs to be within a certain range. But you get to a point where you're at a force range where 95% of your population can do it. Well, now you have a decision to make. Is that good enough? And am I going to go with that and launch it? So that's taking on some debt. It's taking on some debt to.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Or am I going to launch it? You know, I'm going to wait and I'm going to launch it when 100% of the people can meet whatever that force is. That's one example where you might make the decision to take that debt on to make it even better, but it is a little bit harder because it costs more to change later than it does to just implement now. So that's the decision that needs to be made. Am I going to take this debt on or no?
It's kind of that trade-off analysis of, okay, what's the downside risk of whether it's usability or commercial success or cost or otherwise of us just moving forward now versus fixing this now. But I think that goes back to as well, like having that robust Gen 2 iterative development roadmap where you can start feeding those things in and then have an active program working on those things. So you're paying down the interest a little bit, right? You're putting it on a payment plan because you are working on it. You are working on a solution. You're not just like, throwing it in the back and paying maybe the minimum monthly balance or whatever on it, to use a credit and debt turn of phrase there. No, that's really interesting. When kind of as you were starting to go into that, I was almost thinking in my head, something that I've seen work well on product development teams. You've got your user needs, your good user inputs, and you feel good about that. And then you're starting to work through design concepts and things to accomplish those features and design inputs, etc. And I've seen sometimes, especially with certain team dynamics, where it's like, oh, what if we did it this way? And everyone looks at it and you're like, yeah, that would work. And then you move on, right? And that's fine. And a lot of the times it will work just fine. And I think people will often take that approach, especially if it's kind of smaller features, if you will, or kind of just like, it's not even a feature, it's just a thing that helps accomplish this user need in some small way, kind of a sub feature, if you will, like a larger system or whatever. I think when you do that, you end up missing some elements. And I think kind of almost like an inverse approach is like, let's not have our design team and our brain power just try to find something that works and then move forward with that. It's let's get every option on the table for like how this might happen. What's the shape? Is it going to be a snap fit? Does it thread a little bit? Does a collar unlock? What are all the different ways that we could do this? And you get 4 or 5 different options. And well, which materials could we do this with? It needs to be ABS. Okay, we could do all of these 3 with ABS. What's going to be the strongest? What would allow us to have a wider range, better hold, like lower force first to snap it on. And it seems trivial when you're doing it for small stuff, but I feel like that kind of all comers and then reductive process or deductive process, you end up like at the end of it, maybe you took an extra 15, 20 minutes, but like you really understand why you chose that one and not the other four versus you had one concept, maybe two, but like usually one concept for like, oh, we're going to do it this way. And then you just keep moving forward with it. Right? And that's kind of that like where the tech debt at a root cause in my mind sometimes gets created. And then it manifests when you see it in the field, and then it turns into real tech debt. Any thoughts on that?
To add to what you were saying, a lot of where my mind was going was upfront architecture decisions, subsystem decisions, and what goes into that. And one thing that I am a big advocate for and fan of is decision matrices and really laying out what are my different design options. And really, I like to start high level and then system level or subsystem level. And then from subsystem level, you dig into the nitty gritty detailed decisions.
Yeah.
But I think it's a great tool and it's a great way to get all the options out there, highlight which ones you actually have data for and which ones you don't. Which one's your matrix or decision matrix? It's filled in, it has an evaluation, but it's more subjective than it is data driven. And then it really enables a good, robust discussion on your team and a documentation of the decision that's made as well. So that's where my mind was going when you were talking through all that was good decision making practice.
Yeah.
In addition to that, having a good process.
If a Series B Medtech CEO, right, is listening to this right now, what's one question that they should ask their head of engineering on Monday morning to flush out hidden tech debt? How can a leader within an organization get to that now and try to get ahead of it?
Oh, into hidden tech debt?
Or get in front of it, maybe not ahead of it.
Yeah.
Or is it possible? I mean, the answer maybe it's not once it's happened, but I guess like assuming it's happened, right? There's seeing it, perceiving it, getting in front of it, rectifying it. What would you recommend to those that are wanting to investigate this in their own organization with their own products?
Yeah, I think having the upfront discussion with your head of engineering, say, where should I be worried? Where are you seeing the vulnerabilities? Where are you seeing the risk? I don't want, and I can't stand for any surprises. I hate surprises. I start there, but I think there is a level with internal teams where, and the cognitive science actually supports this as well, they are going to be more protective of something they've created. And they're going to see any change in their strategy or pivot as a loss versus a potential benefit.
They've got some like defensiveness or sunken cost fallacy into what they do.
Human nature. I think it's natural. There's science that supports that as well. So I think getting an outside look at your development plan, process, what you've done, what you haven't done yet is actually a very wise and it's a very smart thing to do. And it's something that I've done in my career. I think it takes some discussion and coaching with your internal team. Say, hey, this is so we're all successful. It's not because I don't trust you. It's just something that's going to put us all in the position to be successful. And it's very smart, I think, to do. So I would say, hey, first have the upfront conversation with your head of R&D or whatever it is. Let's bring a partner in as well that doesn't feel ownership over this thing to find some vulnerabilities so that we serve our customers better at the end of the day.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. So I'm sure you've been doing this long enough that you've been a part of teams or even led teams through crisis situations, whether that's design pivots or technical fires or issues in the field that were like 5-alarm fires. So like, what's the kind of leadership move that actually worked that you saw when things were on fire or that you recommend whenever people are dealing with these crisis situations?
Yeah, I think it starts with your team dynamic and setting the team up for success. And actually, at times, it's necessary to take a team and a group of people out of the day-to-day, and their sole mission is to solve and conquer whatever urgent issue it is. And then as you do that, I think driving clarity is very important. So clarity of what success is, clarity of what the actual problem is, and then clarity of roles and responsibilities, I think is something that teams don't always take the time to set all that up. And they just want to dive into the problem and solve it. But taking a day, a half a day to set a team up and drive that clarity works wonders in
Yeah.
terms of setting the team up to solve the problem and solve it efficiently.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I've been a part of these issues and seen when they happen. And I think the pulling them out of the day-to-day and the clarity piece is huge, just because I feel like in a lot of companies, it's, oh, this is a 5-alarm fire, but not enough for me to like unburden you with the normal crap that you have to deal with. You got to give them that space and that kind of mental bandwidth. And I think pulling them out, like you said, is a big key to that. So you've talked about the joy of engineering and the joy of being in product development within medtech. What does that kind of joy of engineering mean to you? What does it actually look like in your view in like a healthy medtech team?
Yeah, I think all of us got into engineering and product development for a reason. We're probably curious people, like to solve problems, like to see the fruit of our labors, if you will, have an impact on people. And I'd say one of the best times in my career was at Dexcom developing the G6 system. And, that was, I'd say it was somewhat unique at the time, where once we launched that product and got it into people's hands, it was a medical device, but it was treated as a consumer device. And you could immediately see the impact that it got in people's hands. They were going on social media. They were taking videos of the product, their interaction with it working. The joy that was coming from them in response to the product that you just designed, developed, and worked on was phenomenal. And I don't think there's anything better that you can ask for as an engineer and product developer to see that. So I think I want other people to experience that, and good leadership, good processes in product development make the whole experience run better, go better. People feel, appreciated, and what they're doing, there's value to it, and there's a mission associated with it.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, and kind of where my head's going with that is the engineering and product development team is probably not going to have a direct day-to-day visibility into some of those success stories or wins like you're talking about. Like you guys had like a consumer product. You could just go search something or search it on Instagram or Twitter, wherever, and probably see this stuff. But like in a lot of companies and a lot of medical devices, like that's just not the way it works, right? But a lot of the times, whether it's sales leadership or executive leadership, they are going to have visibility into that stuff where it's like, someone gives them a testimonial or someone on the marketing team, or they get it from one of the salespeople in the field or something like that, right? They see that stuff. And so instead of the first reaction being like, oh, I need to make a LinkedIn post about that and talk about how great our company is and whatever, before you do any of that, package it up, or whether it's a testimonial or whatever that win is, and send it to the product development team. Be like, this is because of you guys. Lift them up, let them celebrate it with them, give them that win in their sales, and use that as an opportunity to express appreciation and kind of a hoorah moment with the team, because they may not ever see that unless you take that opportunity. And then you can go to the LinkedIn post, and then you can, you should still give them credit and the whole team credit and all that stuff. But I feel like whether you're the engineering or product development lead or like a founder, like you got to remember to do that and share those wins, because if not, like you said, it's easy to get burned out. That's where a lot of the joy can really come from, is having visibility into those wins.
Definitely. The other thing is, I think it needs to be authentic. It needs to be authentic and genuine from the leader. I'm very passionate about this. Here's why. Here's what I'm seeing out there. And sometimes we need to do better. Here's someone that had a problem with our device. We as a team need to find a solution for them and serve the customer first. But I think it starts with authenticity from the leader, that they genuinely believe in the mission of what they're doing, what the team's doing. And that rubs off on the team, I think, in a big way, where they buy in. And they'll go the extra mile because they want to, because they believe in it, not because they're being forced to.
And to that point, like if you're bringing them wins and helping establish that joy and putting wind in their sails and giving them credit, like when there are wins, right? I feel like it makes it exponentially easier that when something isn't going right and you're like, hey, we need to fix this. We need to better serve our customers, and bringing that balance of like, I'm going to celebrate with you when things are great and when we're having wins, and when stuff's not going great, I'm going to come in and we're going to have to roll up our sleeves and fix it. But you're getting credit whenever credit's due, and that those kind of joyful wins happen. Paired with that is the responsibility and the weight of really buckling down and fixing things when they're not going great. Because if you only have the latter, if you're only getting, hey, things are bad, fix it, and you're not getting to share in those wins, right? That's when you get burnout. That's when you feel like you're toiling away and you're only shit slides downhill situation where you're only like, you're cleaning up this and you're cleaning up that, and all this success that you're contributing to and generating, you're not getting either credit or visibility or experiencing that joy from.
Yeah, I was going to say people respond better to bad news or to challenge when they know you authentically care, both about the customer and that you authentically care about them as well. If you want to push the team, if you want to challenge them, if you want to say, we need to do better in this area, if they know it's coming from a place of, hey, I authentically care about the mission and I authentically care about you, the response is a lot different.
Yep, I agree. All right, last question here, and then I'll turn it over to you for a bit of closing remarks. But if you could force every growth stage founder or leader to do one thing before they embark on their next product development, and kind of engineering project, whether it's starting up a new program, charting the path, like one thing that you could force them to do or advice you could give them, right? What would it be?
I mean, for growth stage, launching a product coming up soon, get that second look. Even if you feel like it's too late to do it, it's never too late. Never too late to find out where there might be some gremlins hiding. That's one thing that we used to talk about the product development teams. Where are the gremlins hiding? Because they're always there. They're always hiding somewhere. Let's go out and find them. So I'd say it's never too late to find them and come up with a strategy to deal with them. Don't think it's too late. If you're about to launch or you've already launched, get that second look because it'll pay dividends for you.
Yeah. And just a quick point on that, like this is already something that's baked into the design and development process, right? Through like you've got your design and development team, your design review meeting 1, 2, 3, etc. There's an independent reviewer on there. Why? Because there's such immense value in that person that's not that close to it and doesn't see it all the time, being able to look in from the outside with that perspective and say like, wait, why are we doing this? Here's a gremlin. Here's something that's like kind of fraught for issues later if we don't fix it now. So like, I think there's clearly value in that. And I understand people may, even if they agree with the value, they may think, if they find something, I don't want to have to fix it. You got to break yourself of that if that's what you're thinking. You just got to pull the trigger and do it because, like you're saying, the time and the effort and potentially resources or whatever that it will take to do that, you're going to eliminate so much tech debt in the future, like you're talking about. And then you're ultimately going to be better off for it, right? And it can help save you immense amount of time and trouble and headache and money down the road and in the future. Okay, this part of the pod, turn it over to you for like a final parting thoughts and words here. You can give any tips, wisdom you want, plug anything you want, give shout outs to anybody. You could read us a poem or a haiku if you want. Floor is yours, wherever you want to go with it. And then I'll give us the sign off after.
Okay, sounds good. I appreciate all the time here, Spencer. It's been an awesome discussion and I've really enjoyed it. So thank you for giving me the opportunity and the platform. I want to talk to people. I want to get out there. I want to talk to product development leaders. I want to start discussions. I want to talk about all the biggest challenges that everyone's facing in the industry. You can find me on LinkedIn. My name, Ryan Schoonmaker. My company, Tightline Solutions. You can find me there. I also have a newsletter on Substack where I talk about, all sorts of different things. But it's called Tightline Field Notes, an inside look at Medtech product development. I tie it back to fishing, so there's a lot of metaphors in there. It's a good read, and I encourage everyone to reach out to me. I want to have discussions with people kind of like this and move the industry forwards.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And for everybody listening, like Ryan, Tightline Solutions, we'll put all of that in the show notes, his LinkedIn, website, all that stuff, so you can find him, reach out to him, connect with him. That's what I did. I literally, Ryan, just DM'd you. I was like, hey, I really like what you're doing. Interested in what you're talking about. I want to talk to you about it live and highly recommend it. Ryan he's too humble. He's had like an illustrious career and an incredible mechanical engineer and also just engineering leader, which like I think matters a ton today. Shifting workforce, we can go down the list, all the tech debt, but like having good engineering leadership and good inside and also external eyes on things has like never been more important. So if you're leading a project, if you're leading a program, if you are wanting to make sure that the product you're launching is right and you want to know where the gremlins are, reach out to Ryan, have a conversation with him. I know it'll be worth it. But Ryan, absolute pleasure. Really, really enjoyed, honestly, every time we've talked, like just really enjoy your perspective and how you think about things. It's really fresh. And yeah, looking forward to just like continuing connecting in the future as well. But for everybody that listened for the whole pod, I know you got a ton of value out of it because I did as well. Thanks for sticking around and hope you have a great rest of your week. Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks a lot.